The electric coupe glowed like a cherry dropped on snow, humming in my parents' Cedar Ridge driveway as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The paint threw back the late afternoon sun in blades of light, clean and cruel, cutting across the cul-de-sac where dog walkers slowed and stared and pretended not to. Lila spun beside it, the hem of her sundress flaring, laugh high and glassy like a champagne flute tapped with a knife. She tilted her head so the sun caught her hair. Perfect, polished, impossible. And for one fraction of a second, she looked like an actress in a car commercial. Maybe she was. Maybe this whole scene was an ad for a life that was never mine to claim. I was still in scrubs, shoes stained with the quiet evidence of other people's emergencies. My Subaru wheezed as I killed the engine. The heater fan ticked in the silence like a metronome marking the distance between the person I'd always been and the one I was about to become. My phone pulsed again on the passenger seat. Low balance alert. I didn't pick it up. I already knew what it was going to say, and denial, polite, well-mannered, Midwestern denial, goes down smoother than truth. "Isn't she gorgeous?" Lila purred, dragging fingernails the color of a crime scene along the curve of the hood. The salesman basically gave it to me. I stepped out, the cold spring air snapping at my skin. Cedar Ridge smelled like cut grass and mailboxes that never got broken into. It sounded like sprinklers tick-ticking across perfect lawns. It looked exactly like a place where nothing bad ever happened. It looked like a lie. "Lila," I said, and even I could hear the ice in it. "Where did you get the money?" Mom and Dad were on the porch with plastic flutes of supermarket champagne. Dad had that look, cherry red face, proud, a little breathless, as if he'd negotiated a truce with the universe. Mom smiled the smile she pulls out for nurses and neighbors and anyone who might judge. "Sweetheart," she said, voice dipping into the softest register, the one that used to talk me off ledges when I was 10. "Your sister needed reliable transportation. We just used the family rainy day fund, the one you set up." The world didn't tilt. It snapped. You hear all your life about a straw breaking a camel's back, but what no one tells you is that the straw is never just a straw. It's every straw you swallowed instead of naming. It's every holiday argument you smoothed with a joke. It's every overdraft fee you paid quietly so the lights would stay on. It's every time someone you love rolled a problem onto your lap and called it family. "That's not a rainy day fund," I said, surprised at how steady I sounded. "That's my down payment. $62,400. Every bonus, every skipped vacation, every Sunday night I told myself instant noodles were fine because one day I'd put a key in a door with my name on it." Lila flipped her hair. "Don't be dramatic, Erin. You're like, good with money. You'll save it again. Isn't that your thing?" Dad cleared his throat. "Your sister's got interviews this week. First impressions matter." "For what?" I heard myself ask, a laugh in it that didn't belong to me. "The fourth job she quits this year or the degree she never finishes?" Lila's eyes slicked over with tears exactly on cue. "She's being cruel, Mom." And that was the script. That had always been the script. Erin the reliable, Erin the fixer, Erin the family firewall. 12 years old and making Lila's lunches while Mom slept off migraines. 13 and balancing Dad's checkbook because overdraft notices came like weather. 22 and co-signing an emergency line of credit because we're good for it, honey. 29 and making minimums on cards that someone must have put on auto pay by mistake. 32 and staring at a car that smelled like my future, burned. My phone pulsed again. I finally picked it up. Available, $143.17. The number felt obscene. "You drained it," I said, but without asking, without telling me. Mom reached for that soft tone again, the one layered with pity and permission. "Honey, you've always been so strong, so smart with money. You can handle this better than any of us." "Right," I said, and something very old inside me stood up. "Because I'm the strong one." Relief flashed across her face. Habitual, automatic, because in our family, strong meant compliant. It meant I would swallow this too and call it love. I opened my banking app instead. I'm also the primary on every account I created, I said, thumb already moving. The one who's been covering Dad's minimums since his early retirement without a plan. The one whose savings secured your emergency line of credit. The one who is done. Dad's glass froze at his lips. Erin, what are you doing? I hit call. Hi, I said when the banker picked up. This is Erin Blake. Please close account 3197 effective immediately. Yes, including all linked credit lines. That's the point. Mom lunged for my phone. I stepped back without thinking. You can't, she said, the softness cracking. I can, I said, because it's my money. Lila folded her arms. You're just jealous, because Mom and Dad love me more, because you're boring. She gestured at my scrubs, the Subaru, the life I owned. Look at you. I looked. Shoes scuffed, nails unpainted, sleep deprived, bank account bleeding, backbone for once visible. Funny thing about karma, Lila, I said. It doesn't always wait. What is that even? You'll find out in about 72 hours, I said, sliding into my seat, when those cards stop working. I shut the door. Through the glass, the world had that aquarium quiet that makes people look kinder than they are. Dad was already dialing. Mom had Lila gathered to her like a child woken by thunder. The coupe hummed, patient and pleased, like a creature that knew where it belonged. The perfect family portrait. Mom and Dad flanking their golden child, held by the one person who always paid the framing bill. I put the car in drive and didn't look back until the stop sign. 2 blocks away, I pulled over and let my hands shake. I clicked the seat heater on because control is sometimes as small as warmth. Then I scrolled to a number I hadn't called in months. Jonah, I said when he answered. Remember telling me to stop enabling them? He exhaled a laugh. Yeah, I just did something irreversible. A beat. Finally, he said, meet me at the Copper Owl. Bring every statement you've got. The Copper Owl was a long room of dark wood and stories, the kind of bar where jazz hums under conversation like a second spine. Jonah already had his laptop open, cable coiled like a question mark. We didn't hug. We've never been the hugging kind. He just tilted the screen toward me and said, 3 days. That's how long until the bank dominoes finish falling. They've called 19 times, I said, watching the ice in my glass surrender quietly to water. Texts, voicemails. We raised you better than this. Your sister is sick with worry. Guilt with glitter, Jonah said, fingers moving. He tapped through my banking history, my credit report, the old joint account with Mom I thought I'd closed at 23. Look, he angled the screen. Micro transfers. $20 here, $75 there. Recurring, irregular. 3 years. How much? I asked. The question felt like stepping into cold water when you can't see the bottom. He hesitated. Roughly $12,000. The room rocked once, gently like a boat adjusting to a new truth. That's not possible. It's deliberate, he said. And that's not all. A few more clicks. You're listed as co-signer on the coupe. I never signed anything. Then we're out of family mess and into felony fraud. He didn't look triumphant. He looked sad, like a surgeon who's seen this kind of wound too many times. My phone buzzed. Mom, emergency. Please pick up. Jonah nodded. Speaker. Erin! Mom's voice was frayed wire. The bank froze everything, your father's cards, the home equity line. Lila's payment bounced. The dealership is... What did you do? What I said I would, I answered. Closed my accounts. And I'm filing police reports for the forged signatures I found. We borrowed, she snapped. We're good for it. According to Dad's credit report, you're maxed on 6 cards and 3 lines. Good for it. Where, exactly? Silence. In the bar's soft light, it wasn't the kind of silence that feels like peace. It was the kind that arrives when lying stops working. Come home, she said finally. We'll talk. Great, I said, finishing my drink. I want you to see my face when the lies stop working. Their living room smelled like popped champagne and panic. Lila's mascara had melted into 2 precise tracks. Dad paced the window as if motion could intimidate consequences. "The bank says they're pulling everything by Friday," he announced. "Something about unsupported collateral." "That would be my savings," I said, sitting like the room belonged to me. "The ones Lila evaporated on a victory lap." "They might take the car," Lila shrieked. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" "Almost as humiliating," I said, as calling my realtor and telling her my down payment vanished. Mom cried. Dad blustered. Lila reached for every old hook: family, loyalty, forgiveness, algorithms that used to run my life. I stood. "Parents protect their children," I said. "They don't harvest them." "You can't cut us off," Mom snapped, grabbing my wrist. "We're your parents." I removed her hand carefully, like disarming a trap. "And I'm your daughter, not your pension. Check your mail tomorrow. The default notices should arrive around lunch." I glanced at Lila. "Park the car in the garage. Repo trucks prefer the dark." I closed the door. It was the softest sound I'd ever made and the loudest thing they'd ever heard. By Tuesday, my intercom was a metronome of apology and threat. The neighbors started to complain. Priya, my best friend and the only realtor I'd ever trust, arrived with coffee and a look that said, "I will fight someone if necessary." "The tow truck picked up the coupe at dawn," she said, handing me her phone. The video showed Lila screaming at 2 men who have seen everything. Mom tried to anchor the car with her body. Dad waved papers like a charm against the inevitable. "Forged loan documents," I said, almost kindly. "Yesterday's bonus round." "Erin," Priya said quietly, "that's identity theft. That's not karma. That's prison." The buzzer went again, long, insistent, entitled. I took the elevator down. My heart pounded. My spine didn't move. Lila shoved through as soon as I opened the door. "The bank called. Dad might be charged. You did this." "No," I said. "You did when you forged my name, when you decided I was a resource instead of a person." Mom reached for me, tears shining like stage lights. "We're family. You can't—" "I already did," I said. A patrol car slid to the curb, quiet as a period. The officer separated us with practiced gentleness. "Ma'am," he told Mom, "if you return here again, you'll be cited for harassment." He looked at me. "You okay?" "For the first time," I said. "I think so." That night, under fluorescent lights the color of old paper, Detective Isabella Alvarez spread my documents across her desk and made a map of my last decade. "This is extensive," she said, "and deliberate. We can move quickly, but once we file, there's no going back." "I've lived a whole life going back," I told her. "I'm done." My boss, Marta Kemp, showed up with another folder, jaw set. "Your sister applied at our firm last night," she said. "Falsified records, claimed you'd verify. We're cooperating fully." Alvarez's pen moved like a metronome. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, financial abuse. She glanced at the clock. "We'll request warrants at 9 a.m. Mom called while we waited. Alvarez tipped her chin. "Answer." "Erin." Mom's voice threaded through static. "Your father's at the ER. His blood pressure. Please talk to the bank. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It was a plan." "After everything we did for you," she snapped, and the mask fell, the kind smile cracking with the effort of holding a lifetime of justifications together. "You mean after everything you took?" I said. My voice didn't shake. "Mrs. Blake," Alvarez said, leaning toward the speaker, professional and merciful all at once. "This is Detective Alvarez with the Financial Crimes Unit. For your sake, call an attorney." The line went dead. Outside, in the insomnia hour of a city that thinks it's safe, I stepped into air that felt like a clean page. I didn't know yet how the next chapters would write themselves. I only knew this. The pen, finally, was in my hand. At 9:12 a.m. sharp, Detective Alvarez's phone buzzed. She looked up from her desk, eyes steady. "The warrants just went through. We move in 10 minutes. The words landed like thunder wrapped in calm. My parents, my sister. The family I'd spent a lifetime protecting from their own choices were about to face the truth I'd been financing for years. I thought I'd feel triumph. I didn't. I felt hollow. Like when you finally shut off a machine that's been humming for so long you'd forgotten silence existed. By noon, the headlines spread across every local feed. Cedar Ridge couple and daughter accused in identity theft scheme. Photos of my parents' house. A blurred image of Lila in handcuffs. Neighbors standing behind fences, pretending to rake leaves as the police cars idled on the curb. My phone was a hive of buzzing pity and judgment. You didn't have to press charges. They're your family. This is just a misunderstanding. I muted every notification. The world would always find a way to make accountability sound like cruelty, especially when you're the one who finally says, enough. Jonah arrived at my apartment that evening with takeout and a grim smile. "You're on the evening news," he said. "Half the internet thinks you're a monster. The other half thinks you're an icon." "Both sides are wrong," I said quietly. "I'm just tired." He set the food down. "You're free, that's what you are." Maybe. But freedom, I was learning, is heavier than it looks. 2 days later, Marta called me into her glass-walled office. The reflection of the city glimmered behind her like another version of my life waiting to start. "You saw what no one else would have seen," she said, sliding an envelope across the desk. "You did what most people wouldn't have had the courage to do." Inside was a promotion letter, senior cyber risk analyst, a raise, conference slot in November. "We'd like you to tell your story at the National Security Conference," Marta continued. Title: When Family Commits Fraud. People need to hear this. For the first time in months, my throat closed for a different reason. Gratitude. I nodded. "I'll do it." Marta smiled softly. "I know you will." When I left her office, Jonah was waiting by the elevators. "You okay?" "I'm starting to be." Court came faster than anyone expected. The DA wanted a clean case. No theatrics, no appeals. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Real life always is. The pews creaked. The fluorescent lights hummed. Reporters filled the first 2 rows, notebooks poised like weapons. My parents looked older, smaller, deflated. Lila sat behind them, her perfect hair now tied back, her expression somewhere between fury and fear. When she saw me, her mouth tightened. She mouthed one word, traitor. The judge entered. The bailiff called for order. The prosecutor began his opening statement, describing years of deceit, forged signatures, fake applications, the $312,000 siphoned in, micro transfers of trust. Every word was a scalpel. I wanted to look away, but I made myself listen. When it was my turn, I stood. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Your Honor," I said, "I can calculate every dollar. I can show you the patterns, the signatures, the falsified lines. But what I can't calculate is the cost of growing up thinking love meant debt. That responsibility meant silence. That being the strong one meant bleeding quietly so everyone else could float." Mom began to cry. Dad stared at the floor. Lila glared, her tears sharp enough to cut glass. "I used to believe forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened," I continued. "Now I know forgiveness means telling the truth out loud and walking away if they refuse to hear it." The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens. Even the judge's face softened just for a heartbeat. Then Lila stood suddenly, voice rising. "You're lying! You're jealous! You ruined us!" The gavel slammed. "Miss Blake, sit down or you'll be removed." Her lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously. Then, after a long pause, Dad spoke for all of them. "Your Honor," he said, his voice hoarse, "my clients wish to change their plea to guilty." The air in the room shifted, heavy, irreversible. The judge nodded once. "So noted. Sentencing follows immediately." His words fell like stones. "Philip and Margaret Blake, you are sentenced to 5 years in state prison, parole eligible after 3, and ordered to pay full restitution to the victim. Lila Blake. 36 months for identity theft and fraud. Mom gasped. Dad's shoulders crumpled. Lila screamed, "You did this, Erin. You destroyed this family." I met her eyes. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped letting you destroy me." Reporters were waiting outside as we left the courthouse. "How does it feel to send your parents to prison?" one shouted. I stopped just long enough to answer. "I didn't send them anywhere. Their choices did." Jonah guided me through the crowd, his hand steady on my shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here." 2 weeks later, the sky above Cedar Ridge was the color of forgiveness, clear but not empty. Priya burst into my office, phone in hand. "Keys at 4, she shouted. "What keys?" "Your house. Closing's done. Papers signed." "The same day?" I asked. She grinned. "Karma's punctual." That afternoon, I stood before a 2-story home with gray siding and white shutters, the kind of place I used to pass and whisper someday. The porch creaked under my steps. The door opened smooth. Sunlight flooded through wide windows. It smelled like lemon oil and possibility. My name, mine alone, was printed on the deed. Priya popped champagne in the kitchen. "To new beginnings." Jonah raised his glass. "To boundaries." I laughed through the sting in my throat. "To audits." We toasted, laughing, the sound echoing through the empty rooms like music. The doorbell rang. Detective Alvarez stood there, folder in hand, her smile gentle. "Their appeal was denied," she said. "Restitution is in progress. And your case? It's being used in our training program for financial abuse victims. You've helped people you'll never even meet." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Thank the version of you who finally said no. That's the hardest one to become." When she left, silence returned, but this time it felt like peace, not absence. That night, I unpacked the last box, the one labeled Old Life. Inside were family photos, birthday cards, the checkbook with Mom's looping handwriting, and the word love scrawled in a script that suddenly looked like a contract. I sat on the floor and held one picture up to the light. Me at 15, braces and hope, sandwiched between my parents and Lila on a beach vacation I'd saved to pay for. I set it down gently, then slid it back into the box. I taped it shut. Some memories don't need to be displayed. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. The correctional facility area code glared on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Erin," Mom whispered. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "We'll have nowhere to go when we get out." I took a slow breath. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background, steady, kind. "Then I hope you find the kind of help that doesn't have my name on it," I said. "Please." "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up. Not out of hate, out of healing. Outside, a tow truck rumbled by, carrying repossessed furniture towards someone else's fresh start. I watched it disappear down the hill, feeling something close to peace. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't anyone's safety net, and that, finally, felt like freedom. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No phone calls, no guilt-laced messages, no emergencies disguised as love. I'd wake before sunrise, make coffee, and stand by my kitchen window watching the neighborhood wake up. Birds picked at the grass, joggers moved past with earbuds in. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to brace myself for someone else's crisis. It was strange how peace could feel both foreign and fragile. I'd spent years believing calm was a prelude to chaos, that silence was just the inhale before the next storm. But slowly, I started to believe in stillness again. One evening, I met Jonah and Priya at our favorite diner, the one that still had vinyl booths and played Sinatra on loop, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions, just refills your coffee. "You look different," Priya said, studying me over the rim of her cup. "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've been underwater for a decade and finally surfaced." Jonah grinned. "You're officially debt-free, financially and emotionally." I laughed, but there was truth in it. The bank had finalized the restitution plan. My parents' and Lila's assets were being liquidated to repay the damages. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about accountability, something my family had treated like a foreign language. Priya leaned forward. "You ready for your conference next month?" The thought sent a ripple of nerves through me. Almost. Marta wants me to share my story, how financial abuse can happen even in families that look perfect. "You'll help people," Jonah said. "A lot of them." I nodded, but deep down I still wrestled with guilt. The kind that whispers maybe you could have fixed them if you'd tried harder. That's what years of manipulation does. It turns your self-worth into a battlefield. That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop and started writing my speech. When family commits fraud, protecting what's yours. I wrote about trust, about boundaries, about how love that demands silence isn't love, it's control. I wrote about the strong one in every family, the person who cleans up messes and calls it duty. And I wrote about the moment strength turns into surrender, the line you don't see until it's already behind you. By midnight, my fingers were stiff, my eyes wet. But the words on the screen felt like a confession and a rebirth at once. I wasn't just telling my story, I was reclaiming it. The conference took place in Denver 3 months later. Rows of professionals filled the auditorium: lawyers, cybersecurity experts, financial advisors. Marta introduced me as someone who saw danger where others saw devotion. When I stepped up to the podium, my pulse was a drumbeat. The bright lights blurred the faces in front of me, but somewhere in that sea of strangers, I knew there were people living the same quiet nightmare I'd survived. "My name is Erin Blake," I began. I used to believe that being the responsible one made me safe, that if I worked hard enough, forgave enough, sacrificed enough, I could keep everyone together. But what I didn't know was that loyalty without boundaries is self-destruction wearing a halo. The room was silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I told them about the car, the bank, the signatures, the courtroom. I told them about the moment I realized the word family doesn't excuse fraud, and that protecting yourself doesn't make you heartless, it makes you whole. When I finished, there was a long pause before the applause began. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that comes from people who've seen their own reflection in your story. Afterward, a woman in her 50s approached me, tears in her eyes. "My son's been stealing from me for years," she said. "I didn't think I was allowed to stop him." I took her hand. "You are." She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." That night, alone in my hotel room, I stood at the window watching the city lights scatter across the skyline. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim telling a cautionary tale. I felt like someone who had turned pain into purpose. A few weeks later, Marta called me into her office again. "You got mail," she said, holding up a thick envelope. It was from the correctional facility. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were 3 letters, one from each of them. Mom's was short. "I don't expect forgiveness. I hope you're happy." Dad's was longer, filled with excuses and half apologies. "We only wanted to help Lila. We didn't think it would go this far. Lila's was angry and raw. You think you're better than us. But when we get out, you'll see. Family doesn't stay broken forever." I folded them all back into the envelope and slid it into a drawer. Some stories don't need replies. The house had started to feel like mine in ways I didn't expect. There were plants on the windowsills now, their leaves turning toward the morning light. I'd painted the kitchen a soft sage green. Jonah and Priya came over most weekends. We grilled in the backyard, laughed too loud, made plans for trips I'd never have dared to take before. One afternoon, while hanging new curtains, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, local. "Hello? Miss Blake?" a voice asked. "This is Officer Daniels with the Department of Corrections. Just letting you know your parents were released early on good behavior. Your sister has another year." "Thank you," I said simply. I hung up and stood in the middle of my living room, sunlight pouring across the floor. For a long time I felt nothing. Not anger, not fear, just acceptance. the kind that comes when the story no longer owns you. Later that evening, I found myself driving through Cedar Ridge, past the old house. The coupe was gone, the driveway cracked, the curtains drawn. The for sale sign leaned crooked in the grass. For years, that house had been a monument to everything I couldn't fix. Now it was just another property waiting for a new owner, a different story. I parked a block away and sat there for a while, watching the wind move through the trees. Then I whispered a quiet goodbye. To them, to the girl who used to live inside their expectations, to the family that had built their comfort on my silence. When I drove away, I didn't look in the mirror. That night, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you build after you stop apologizing for locking the door. Then I closed the book, turned off my phone, and let myself sleep. Deep, dreamless, earned sleep. Winter came early that year, dressing Cedar Ridge in a thin frost that made everything look cleaner than it really was. I liked the cold. It was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. By December, my new life had settled into a rhythm I didn't know I craved. Mornings started with coffee on the porch and quiet music humming from the kitchen. No alarms, no frantic phone calls, no guilt threaded through every breath. Just me, my thoughts, and the kind of peace that used to sound like fiction. The keynote speech had changed everything. Emails poured in from strangers across the country, mothers, sons, professionals, even teenagers, each with a story about how someone they loved had crossed that invisible line between need and exploitation. Some thanked me for naming what they couldn't. Others said my story gave them permission to reclaim theirs. Marta stopped by my desk one afternoon holding her coffee with that rare hint of pride she usually reserved for promotions. "We've had record donations to the Fraud Awareness Initiative since your talk," she said. "You started something, Erin." I smiled. "Good. Maybe fewer people will mistake guilt for love." "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe they'll just recognize it sooner." That night, I drove home through soft snow. My porch light glowed like a promise in the dark. When I walked inside, my dog, a rescue I'd adopted 2 months earlier, bounded toward me with that pure, uncomplicated joy only animals know how to give. I named him Murphy, after my grandfather, the only person who ever taught me that honesty and kindness could live in the same sentence. I knelt to pet him. "We did it, buddy," I whispered. "We built a life." The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, warmth wrapping around me like forgiveness that didn't require permission. A few days before Christmas, I received another envelope from the correctional facility. This one was thinner, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a single page, written in my father's blocky script. "Erin, I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, for raising you to believe love meant sacrifice. You deserved better parents. We can't undo it, but we're trying. Dad." For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I felt release. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into the back of my journal, not to reread, but to remember that some apologies aren't about reconciliation. They're about recognition. Christmas morning came quietly. Snow whispered against the windows. Priya and Jonah showed up early with coffee, gifts, and far too much food. Murphy pranced between us, his tail a metronome of joy. "Your place feels like a movie set," Priya said, handing me a mug. "Peaceful, but not empty." "It's weird, right?" I said, smiling. "I used to think quiet meant loneliness. Now it just feels like space to breathe." Jonah raised his mug, to breathing and boundaries. We clinked glasses, laughing. After brunch, we bundled up and went for a walk. The air smelled like pine and smoke from distant fireplaces. Cedar Ridge was still the same postcard town it had always been, except this time I wasn't playing a role in someone else's picture. We passed the old family house again. A sold sign leaned in the yard. The curtains were gone. The porch had been repainted a warm blue. A young couple stood outside, holding hands, smiling at each other like the world was still good. Jonah glanced at me. "You okay?" I watched them for a long moment. "Yeah," I said softly. "Better than okay." He nodded, understanding the layers behind the words. That evening, after my friends left, I lit a single candle by the window. I didn't light it for them, for my parents, or for Lila. I lit it for the version of myself who thought love had to hurt, who believed her worth was measured in how much she could give before breaking. The flame wavered but didn't go out. I sat on the floor with Murphy's head in my lap, the room bathed in soft gold. Outside, the snow fell thick and slow, the world wrapped in silence. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found in the space left behind. Peace, it turned out, wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't announce itself with applause or headlines. It slipped in quietly after years of noise and made itself at home. In late January, I stood once again on a stage, this time at a smaller seminar for young professionals. The banner behind me read, "Financial Integrity and Self-Respect in the Modern World." I took a deep breath and began. When people hear my story, they think it's about betrayal. It's not. It's about boundaries. Because sometimes the people who hurt you aren't villains. They're just people who learned you'll never say no. And the moment you finally do, the world shifts. You start to see where love ends and responsibility begins. A young man in the front row nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I continued, "We teach our kids to share, but we forget to teach them that it's okay to keep some things just for themselves, their peace, their dignity, their future." When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was warm, human, healing. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself in the garden behind my house. The snow had melted, revealing patches of frozen earth. I dug into the soil, planting bulbs that wouldn't bloom until spring. Murphy watched, curious, nose dusted with dirt. I looked up at the pale sky and thought about cycles, of seasons, of pain, of love that has to die so something new can grow. I whispered, "Let it all root the right way this time." The wind carried my breath into the cold, and for once, it didn't feel like a plea. It felt like a prayer. 3 months later, when the first green shoots broke through the soil, I stood barefoot in the yard, coffee in hand, watching the light catch on the leaves. My phone buzzed, a text from Marta. "CNN wants to feature your story. National segment. You ready?" I smiled and typed back, "Yeah, let's do it." Because this time, the story wasn't about the theft or the trial or the pain. It was about healing, about showing that accountability isn't cruelty. It's compassion wearing armor. That evening, Jonah and Priya came over for dinner. We ate outside, fairy lights strung across the fence, the air soft with spring. "To new seasons," Priya said. "To second chances," Jonah added. I raised my glass, the setting sun warm against my skin. "To peace," I said. "The kind you build, not the kind you beg for." They smiled and we drank to that. Later, after they left, I stood alone in the kitchen, the last of the sunlight spilling across the counter. I placed the final photograph, the one from my old family album, into a drawer and closed it softly. That chapter was over, not erased, just finished. Murphy patted over and rested his head on my leg. I smiled down at him. "We're home," I said. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime played a soft, wandering melody. The world, for once, didn't demand anything from me. And in that stillness, I understood something I'd spent a lifetime missing. Freedom isn't revenge. It's peace. And peace is what you get when you finally choose yourself.